Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really focusing on the Chasselas grape. Now, this is a white variety, maybe one that flies a bit under the radar for some,
Hmm.
but it's got such a fascinating history, huge regional importance, and this, well, almost uncanny ability to express its terroir.
It really does.
We've pulled together a whole range of sources covering everything, really. Its history, how it's grown, the winemaking side, how it tastes, food pairings, its place in the market.
Hmm.
We even have some sommelier insights in there.
Yeah, good mix.
So our mission really is to dig out the core essence of this grape. Why should we pay attention even if it's not, a Chardonnay or a Sauvignon Blanc?
Exactly. And for you listening, especially if you like getting up to speed quickly but properly, wanting those aha moments without getting swamped in detail, well, this deep dive should be perfect.
Right.
We've boiled down these sources to the key stuff, the really interesting bits about Chasselas. You shared this material because, well, it tells a unique story, doesn't it?
It does.
What jumps out right away is its adaptability. It's quite surprising. And that really deep connection it has with the place it's grown. It's almost spiritual.
Okay, so let's unpack that. To really get a grip on Chasselas, let's start at the beginning. Origins, history. What do the sources say? Where did it all start?
Well, the strongest evidence we have, and this comes from historical records and genetic analysis, points pretty firmly to Switzerland,
Okay.
specifically the Vaud region near Lake Geneva. The history of it being grown there is pretty solid.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, while Switzerland seems the most likely origin, there are other theories floating around, whispers. Maybe.
Like what?
Some suggest France, maybe Burgundy or the Loire Valley, but the evidence just isn't as strong, not as conclusive.
I see.
There's even a sort of fringe idea about the Middle East, maybe brought over centuries ago through trade, but honestly, the weight of evidence, it's definitely leaning towards Switzerland.
Okay, that makes sense. So if Switzerland was its home base,
Mhm.
how did it then, spread out? How did it get established elsewhere in Europe?
It seems to have been a gradual thing, really. It spread because it's versatile,
Right.
and it made appealing wines in different spots.
Right.
But it's heartland.
Mm.
Definitely still Switzerland. It's the #1 white grape there.
Still dominates there.
Yeah. But it did set up important sort of outposts nearby. In France, for instance, especially in Savoie, where they call it Vendôme, it makes these wonderful, crisp mineral wines there.
Sardin, right.
And then just over the border in Germany, in Baden, they call it Gutedel. It tends to be lighter, delicate, really refreshing.
Gutedel.
And beyond those main areas, you find smaller amounts in places like Hungary, Austria. It's quite something, this journey over centuries, and how it just adapts to all these different terroirs.
That adaptability is key, isn't it? Which brings us perfectly to terroir and how it shapes Chasselas in different regions. You called it a chameleon.
It really is. And Switzerland itself is the perfect place to see this in action. Take Vaud, for example, right by Lake Geneva. The climate's quite temperate, the lake keeps things pretty stable, and the soils, it's a real mix, clay limestone, stony moraine soils left by glaciers. The slopes are mostly gentle.
And the wine.
Chasselas from Vaud often has this lovely floral elegance, bright acidity, and you can genuinely taste the differences from one little village's terroir to the next. It's subtle, but it's there.
Fascinating. And then you contrast that with Valais, which sounds much more dramatic, with the Alps. How does that terroir change the grape?
Oh, Valais is completely different, much drier, sunnier than Vaud, and you get these big swings in temperature between day and night because of the mountains.
Right, the altitude effect.
Exactly. The soils are incredibly diverse, too. Schists, granites, alluvial stuff, often on these super steep terrace slopes. It's quite spectacular.
So the Chasselas there, or fondant, as you said.
Right, mostly fondant there. It tends to be more structured, maybe a bit fuller, with more intense white and stone fruit aromas, and a really distinct minerality. You feel like you can taste the rocks, the mountains, and those temperature shifts. They help build ripeness and keep that acidity nice and vibrant.
And what about Geneva? That's the other main Swiss spot, right?
Yeah, Geneva also gets that Lake Geneva influence, so it's more moderate climatically, again, diverse soils. Chasselas there is often described as, well, light, elegant, fruity, maybe the most immediately easy drinking style.
Okay.
It just shows the variety even within Switzerland. And it really makes you think about Lake Geneva's impact, not just temperature, but reflecting sunlight onto the vines, too.
Helping ripeness.
Precisely.
E.
And the Alps, of course, acting like this huge protective barrier, creating all these little microclimates.
So moving outside Switzerland,
Well,
France, Alsace and Savoie were mentioned in our sources.
yes, in France, Chasselas plays more of a supporting role, you could say, though it still shows regional character. In Alsace, with its varied soils and continental climate, it often goes into lighter wines or blends.
Right.
But Savoie, where it's fondant, that's where it really stands out in France. Those mountain terroirs, limestone and clay soils, cool climate. The fondant wines are just incredibly fresh and vibrant, super mineral-driven. You almost taste the mountain air.
You paint a good picture.
And there's a little bit in the Loire Valley, too, but mostly just as part of blends.
And then Germany Goetedel in Baden.
Exactly, across the Rhine. Baden's generally milder climate-wise, sometimes gets Mediterranean influences. You find some volcanic soils there, too.
And the Goetedel style.
Usually very light, delicate, refreshing. Subtle fruit, subtle floral notes. Wine's really meant to be drunk young and fresh.
It's amazing it's even popped up further afield, Canada, New Zealand.
Yeah, it's quite surprising. There are some newer plantings in cooler spots in Canada and New Zealand. Still small scale, of course.
But they're making decent wine.
Apparently so. Fresh, elegant styles, often with a clear minerality reflecting those specific places. It just underlines, again, that incredible adaptability. Chasselas really seems to soak up the essence of wherever it's planted.
Okay, so we've got the land, the climate. Let's shift to the human touch. What happens in the vineyard, in the winery, to shape the final wine?
Right, the grape itself, ampelography, the sort of botanical description. Chasselas leaves are medium-sized, usually 5-lobed, light to medium green, fairly smooth on top, maybe a bit downy underneath.
Okay.
The bunches, medium, quite compact, shaped like a cone or cylinder. And the berries are medium, round, thin-skinned. They go from greenish yellow to a kind of pinkish color when ripe. The pulp inside is pretty neutral, not massively aromatic on its own.
And its growing cycle, when does it do its thing?
It's known for being relatively early to mid-bud break and early to mid-ripening.
Which is good for cooler places.
Exactly. It's a real plus in areas with shorter growing seasons. Gets the grapes ripe before things get too cold in autumn.
So managing it in the vineyard, what's critical?
Well, it can be quite vigorous and produce big crops if you let it. So careful management is really key.
Aiming.
Things like pruning techniques like guyot or cordon spur are common, basically to control the vine's energy. And yield control is vital. Fewer grapes generally means more concentrated flavor in the ones you do harvest.
Makes sense.
And like everywhere now, there's a growing focus on sustainable organic practices, challenges. Well, those compact bunches and thin skins make it a bit prone to fungal diseases. And climate change is definitely a factor. Earlier ripening, potentially lower acidity if you're not careful in the vineyard and winery.
So once the grapes are picked, how do winemakers typically approach Chasselas? What's the goal?
Generally, the main aim is to preserve that natural freshness, the delicate aromas, the minerality we've talked about.
How do they do that?
Temperature-controlled fermentation in stainless steel tanks is very common. That really helps keep things fresh and clean.
But not always steel.
No, not always. More and more producers are experimenting, using oak, for example, but usually older barrels or large formats so it doesn't overpower the fruit. Just adds a bit of texture, maybe structure.
Interesting.
Cement eggs or tanks are also being used sometimes for similar reasons, texture without overt flavor. And aging sur lie on the lees, the spent yeast cells.
Right, with string battage.
Exactly, sometimes with potage. That's becoming much more common too. It adds body, complexity, a sort of creamy texture sometimes.
So what different styles of Chasselas emerge from all this?
You get quite a spectrum, actually. On one end, the young, fresh style, all about primary fruit, green apple, pear floral hints, that clear minerality, light to medium body, crisp acidity.
The classic style, perhaps?
Often, yes. But then you have more full-bodied, structured versions. Maybe they had some skin contact before pressing, maybe fermented in oak or cement, spent longer on the lees.
And they taste different.
Definitely. More complex aromas, riper fruits, maybe hints of yeast or nuts from the lees aging, perhaps a very subtle oak note. More weight on the palate, but still with good acidity. And some of these can actually age.
Age. Chasselas. I thought it was mostly for drinking young.
Many are, but the best ones, especially from top terroirs. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They can develop beautifully, gaining notes of honey, nuts, and a more complex, savory kind of minerality over time.
Wow. Okay.
And we shouldn't forget sparkling Chasselas. Its natural acidity makes it great for fresh, lively fizz, often made like champagne, the traditional method.
So lots of possibilities.
For sure. It really comes down to the winemaker reading the terroir and guiding the process to get the style they want.
Right. Let's get into tasting it, the sensory side. When we actually have a glass of Chasselas in front of us, what are we looking for on the nose?
It's often quite delicate, nuanced, You might find white fruits like green apple, maybe pear, some citrus like lemon zest,
Uh-huh.
white flowers, lime blossom, acacia, that kind of thing. Often, yes. And then there's that minerality we keep mentioning, flint, whetstone, sometimes a little salty note. It's quite distinctive. And remember, those aromas can change, become more complex, if the wine has some age.
And then on the palate, how does it feel and taste?
Typically dry. The acidity is usually well integrated, giving it that freshness. The flavors often follow the nose fruit, minerality carrying through.
Sommelier.
Texture. Body can range from light and crisp to more medium-bodied. Texture-wise, it might be zesty and clean, or if it's seen lees aging, maybe a bit creamier. But the real hallmark, the unique thing, is how well it shows its terroir. It's like a window onto the place it was grown.
That transparency again. And how does aging change the taste and feel?
As it ages, those fresh fruit notes tend to evolve into deeper things like honey, maybe some dried fruit character, and the minerality often integrates more, becomes maybe more savory, more earthy.
So terroir provides the basics, winemaking shapes it.
That's a good way to put it. Terroir sets the foundation. Acidity, minerals, primary aromas. Yeah. Winemaking then influences the freshness, the complexity, the texture you actually experience in the glass.
Okay. If someone really wants to appreciate Chasselas, any tasting tips from the sources?
Definitely. Temperature is key. Serve the younger, fresher ones quite cool, maybe 8 to 12 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
Sparkling even cooler, like 6 to 8.
Right.
Glassware matters too. A standard white wine glass, maybe tulip-shaped, helps concentrate those delicate smells.
Mm-hmm.
And for older ones, or the more structured styles, don't be afraid to decant them for a short while. Just let them open up a bit.
Good tip.
And when you taste, just take your time, look at the color, swirl it gently, really smell it, then sip and think about the flavors, the feel, the finish, the whole process.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk food. The sources really stress how versatile Chasselas is.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of its great strengths. It goes with so much without overwhelming the food. It's a real team player at the table.
What about those classic Swiss pairings?
Ah, yes. The absolute go-tos are cheese dishes, fondue raclette. It's perfect. Also great with Swiss cheeses like Gruyere and Emmental.
Cuts through the richness.
Exactly. And it's lovely with freshwater fish from the lakes, perch, trout. Also good with charcuterie, cold cuts, even simple potato dishes. These pairings just work. They've evolved together.
And beyond Switzerland, international food matches.
Because it's fresh and mineral, it's fantastic with seafood generally.
Mm-hmm.
Oysters, mussels, grilled prawns, simple white fish. Works brilliantly with sushi and sashimi too.
Okay.
Also good with lighter poultry dishes, lots of vegetarian options, even some mildly spiced Asian food where you don't want the wine to fight the flavors.
So what is it fundamentally about Chasselas that makes it such a good food wine?
It really boils down to that balance of acidity and minerality. The acidity cleanses your palate, cuts through fat or richness. The minerality can echo salty or earthy notes in the food. It just creates harmony.
Any final advice for making a meal with Chasselas really special?
Well, get the temperature right, use a decent glass. Definitely try those regional pairings if you can. They exist for a reason. And, maybe share a little bit about the wine's story, where it comes from, that connection to the place. It just adds another layer to the enjoyment, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, finally, let's look at the market and the future for Chasselas. Where does it stand today?
Well, locally in Switzerland, it's huge. It's their main white grape. But internationally, it's definitely gaining more recognition. People are starting to appreciate its finesse, its terroir expression.
Are there specific producers or wines we should look out for? Any iconic names mentioned?
Yeah, the sources mentioned a few. In Vaud, names like Domaine Louis Bovard, Domaine Henri Cruchon come up.
Okay.
In Valais, Domaine Simon Main Fields is well regarded for fondant. And in Geneva, Domaine des Balisiers makes really good examples. These are producers really showing what Chasselas can do. Just a few examples, of course.
And what about market trends, opportunities, challenges?
There's definitely a growing interest in lighter mineral whites and also in indigenous grapes, things off the beaten path. So that's an opportunity for Chasselas.
Right.
The challenge, well, it's competing against globally known grapes like Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio. So effectively communicating what makes Chasselas special, its diversity, that's ongoing work. And as we mentioned, climate change is a real factor producers are grappling with.
And what about wine tourism? Enotourism in places like Vaud and Valais.
Ah, yes, that's becoming increasingly important. It brings people right into the vineyards, lets them taste the wines at the source, meet the makers.
Connects people to the grape.
Exactly. It educates people, helps the local economy, and just builds that appreciation for the region and the wine.
So wrapping up our deep dive on Chasselas, what are the main takeaways for you, for our listener?
I think it's about appreciating its deep history, likely starting in Switzerland. Understanding its incredible sensitivity to place, how it gives such diverse wines from different terroirs. Recognizing its elegant profile, subtle fruit, flowers, that key minerality, and seeing its potential, its growing reputation globally as a wine that truly speaks of its origins.
It really does sound like a grape with a lot of character, deeply tied to its homeland.
It absolutely is, and we'd really encourage you, the listener, to seek out some Chasselas. Try examples from different regions if you can, and just explore those terroirs through the wine.
Definitely sounds worthwhile. So here's a final thought to leave you with. How can a grape that seems so specific to certain places offer such a wide range of tastes and experiences? And maybe what other overlooked grapes out there hold similar fascinating stories, just waiting for us to discover them? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.